Remember when I told you there would be no more Veteran State of Mind? I lied. Welcome back, guys. As you can see, Veteran State of Mind lives. It lives because you guys sent me messages, and some of you seem quite upset. Some of you didn't, but a lot of you did. And also, I went, if you haven't noticed, been off social media for a bit. Thanks for everyone that checked in to ask if I was still alive. I'm not sure how I'd reply to you if I wasn't, unless it was me risen ghost. But I appreciate that, guys. I am alive. I'm very well. Thank you for asking, those of you who have. I've just swamped with work at the moment. Got some really good books coming out next year. I can't really give information about what they are yet, but the books are really important to me. They're about some big events in history, a lot of them to do with veterans that are no longer with us. So trying to cut down the distractions. As you know, Instagram, that kind of thing can just suck you in. So that's why I'm not on there. So if you don't see me on Instagram for a bit, don't worry, I'm not dead. The podcast is not dead. It's back. It was dead for one episode, now we're back. So basically, like I mentioned in the last podcast, want to concentrate on more war stories, and that's going to happen. But, I was getting messages from some really interesting guests who just didn't fit into that war story kind of category, but they did fit into the veteran category. People dealing with, doing research into different kinds of therapies, people who can really offer something to veterans. So for that reason, Veteran State of Mind is going to continue. We are going to be on a break for a bit. This will probably be the last episode of the year. Might be able to get one more in, but this will probably be the last one of the year. January is going to be quiet because in January we're going to start recording the new episodes, the war story episodes, and there are absolutely banging guests lined up for that. You're going to know some of the names. A lot of them haven't been on the podcast before. In fact, I think most of them haven't been on the podcast before, maybe all. They have great stories to tell. You're going to know some of the names. There's some big names. There's people you've never heard of before, but all of them have incredible stories. So we are going to go forward with an emphasis on war stories, but we will still have episodes. I haven't figured out yet if we're going to start a separate podcast for that, or if we're going to keep the same feed. I will update on that. So just keep listening to this feed for now, guys. And if we are changing, if we're also going to launch like a sister podcast, then I will give information on that on this feed. I want to say thank you to the Patreons who keep supporting the podcast. Like I said, we have a lot of recordings kind of coming up in the new year. So that is what the Patreon fund is going to be going towards. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and what we have coming up next year, then you can do so for as little as £1 a month. If you're interested in doing that, then there's links down in the show notes. And also you can find links about anything that's kind of mentioned in today's episode down in the show notes as well, including our sponsor for today's episode, Combat Fuel. So check those out. And so, yeah, Veteran State of Mind is back. It ain't going anywhere. We'll figure out exactly how things are going to run over the next few weeks. And I'll keep you guys posted on here and on Instagram at VSOM Podcast and at Veteran State of Mind. But those are our two Instagram accounts. All right, guys, let me fill you in on today's guests. Mikael Cook is a former US Army Staff Sergeant and veteran of the war in Afghanistan. He holds a master's degree in business administration, residing and working in Southeast Michigan. During the August 2021 evacuation of Afghanistan, Mikael was a part of the digital Dunkirk team that saved thousands of our Afghan allies that had been left for dead. He was personally responsible for the evacuation of 20 of our allies, most of whom have now joined him in Michigan. Mikael is an active member of the veteran community and continues his advocacy work for Afghan allies left behind. His book, Life and Death at Abbey Gate, is available from December 15th. So, guys, if you enjoyed today's episode, please get behind Mikael and support his book. Great dude, did important work, continues to do so. Really enjoyed our conversation with him. So, without further ado, Veteran State of Mind, it lives. Let's get into it with a very warm welcome to Mikael Cook. Mikael, welcome to the podcast, mate. Great to have you on.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys. This is, such an important topic. This story has been told many times by many different people. but it needs to continue to be told a million more times. So we don't forget what happened over there. We don't forget the people who died there, and our government doesn't make the same mistakes that we did this time. So thank you.
You're welcome, mate. And I second you on that. And we're going to get into it about the details of what happened over there, what happened in your experiences. But before we do, can you give people a kind of 10,000-foot view of who you are in your military career?
Yeah. So my name is Mikael Cook. Grew up in the States, in Michigan, and kind of had a different experience in joining the military. I feel like a lot of guys join at a pretty young age. I had an interesting experience of joining at 28 years old. So going through basic training was a little different for me with, going through with a bunch of young guys. But I joined as a 12 Whiskey in the U.S. Army, which is an engineer. So I was stationed out of Toledo, Ohio, which is a reserve unit. So I spent 6 years in the reserves with one deployment to Afghanistan in 2019 and 2020. So just got out of the Army last October. So started a civilian career, but had a great experience in the military and really fell in love with the country of Afghanistan when I was on my deployment.
All right, so we got to dig into this joining at 28 because that's really interesting. I mean, a lot of guys are. Even a guy that's done like in the UK, you can join at 16. I mean, even if you're doing like a pretty long stint. Oh yeah, we like child soldiers over here. A lot of guys are kind of leaving that age, and a lot of your kind of like age peer group are already kind of moved up the ranks. So, what was the reasoning behind joining a lot later than most?
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was something that I had always wanted to do, but just never felt like the timing was right, I guess. I went to college and then, jumped straight into a career after that. So just never felt like, the timing was right. But eventually, at 28 years old, I'm like, hey, it really is now or never. And I felt like it was something that I just really had to do. I didn't like the fact that other people were serving and I wasn't. So that's really what led to the decision to join. But yeah, I mean, basic training was, almost hilarious because a lot of my drill instructors were younger than I was. But they're still scary as hell to me at that point. So I definitely still respected them.
What was the kind of treatment with it? Because I was a reservist myself, and so we had the same thing when I did these kind of basic training courses, which are a lot shorter than what you'd get in the regular army here. But there was definitely, like, if you were 17, you were going to get treated a lot different to the 32-year-old guy. So what were their kind of relationships with you from like the drill instructor point of view?
Yeah, so in the States, if you're reserve, you go to the same basic training that active duty guys go to. So, there was only a few reserve guys in my unit. So, yeah, I mean, in that sense, you do get treated a little differently. There's negative connotations to reservists, which, I do understand sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think the drill instructors kind of realized that I was pretty squared away. And I just kind of, sat in the shadows and I did what I, was told to do. So I never really got messed with too hard.
And did you have any kind of family influences when it came to this idea of service? And if not, then where did that kind of come from?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I don't have a family history of joining the military. My parents were pretty thrown off at the idea of me joining the military. I mean, they were proud and, excited for my career, but it would not have been what they had chosen for me. But I think I just always had this sense that, I wanted to serve in a bigger sense. I grew up playing sports. I played hockey in college. So I had always had that like team mentality. So I think when I got out of college, I think that was the big thing that was missing for me, is being a part of something bigger. So I think that's ultimately, one of the things that led me into the military and into the Army. And
why specifically the engineers? Was that based on what you were doing as a career at the time?
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Initially, I was looking into some military intelligence occupations. I couldn't get the clearance for that because I'm a dual citizen. I'm a citizen of Sweden as well. So I couldn't qualify for the top secret clearance. So engineer was the next thing on my list because, yeah, that's what I had a lot of experience of doing, that type of work in the civilian sector. So I figured that would be a good transition for me.
So let's talk about then, because I really want to get into the HKIA stuff. So was going out to Kabul just before? We'll go into a bit more detail about how you found out about you going and stuff. But was this your first deployment? Was this your first deployment in the Army?
Yeah, so I wasn't there during the fall of Kabul. I was there in 2019 and 2020. So I deployed with my whole company in 2019. Um, we went to obviously to Bagram to start, but then we kind of got pushed out to within squads and platoon size elements. I went up to Mazar Sharif at first, which is a city in northern Afghanistan. And that's actually where I met the two main characters in my book, Abdul and Mohammed. We worked alongside them. They were contractors. But I guess more importantly, you know, more than their jobs, they were my friends. And I think that's kind of what a lot of people tend to forget is like these people that all of us were trying to help in this digital Dunkirk world were people that we knew very well, and people we worked alongside with and people that we considered to be our friends. So I worked with those guys for a while up in Mazar Sharif. And then at the tail end of my deployment, went down to a little south of Kabul at a place called Camp Moorhead, and spent the rest of my deployment there.
So when you went out to Afghanistan, then it was kind of pretty late. I mean, you know, from the British point of view, there was a very small presence out there at that time. I think it was like just kind of one unit in Kabul, who I think handed over to the 10th Mountain guys in 2021. What was it when you went out there? What was the kind of the situation on the ground, and how did you feel like the outlook for Afghanistan felt at that point?
Well, yeah, it was an interesting time to be there because, you know, the Doha agreement was kind of being inked and signed while we were there, which was interesting. You know, being at Bagram, I had heard from other people on my deployment what Bagram was like in previous deployments, how packed it was. I mean, it was a ghost town when I was there. There was only, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 people on this massive base. And then, you know, we're as engineers, we're, you know, doing all these building projects and projects were getting canceled left and right. So you could really feel like, you know, the evacuation was or troops leaving was happening very quickly.
So the point of view from you guys as soldiers out there, both as, you know, for yourself as an individual and collectively as a, you know, as a unit, you know, how did you guys feel about the way things were going? Was there already a sense of like, we're going to lose this place, or was there still kind of a sense of hope that Afghanistan might be able to stand on its own 2 feet?
I think at that point, I didn't understand the situation well enough. You know, talking to my Afghan friends at the time when the Doha agreement was being signed, they were very scared. And I didn't really comprehend that fear until much later. But they would straight up say to me, like, if you guys leave, we are all going to be killed. And, you know, I was an enlisted soldier. I was an E6 staff sergeant. Like, I didn't fully understand what was happening. As I don't think really anybody did, especially our government. I mean, the assumption on how long the ANA, the Afghan National Army, was going to be able to hold out, you know, was different. I mean, everyone had their own opinion, but it was anywhere from like a year to 10 years to indefinite, right? Like, no one was saying that the Taliban will take over in 5 days like they did. So I don't think we fully comprehended the situation until those late days in August when the Taliban really stormed through the whole country and then through Kabul.
And what could you see on the ground? You know, was there, you know, as an American, as somebody in the American army, you know, who'd put so much blood, sweat, and tears into the place, were you looking at Afghanistan at the time and thinking like, okay, we've built something here? Or was it kind of almost like you almost questioned like, what was it all for at that point? Or could you see people going about their daily lives in peace? Could you see people like children going to school and all this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, things were pretty quiet on my deployment. I mean, at that point, the only American troops that were, you know, still in contact with Taliban were, you know, our ODAs, our special forces units. But, you know, for the average line soldier, it was very just business as usual. Like you said, kids were in school, people had jobs. There was relative safety, especially in the bigger cities. There wasn't a major fear from Afghans about the Taliban. Things were still pretty safe, and the ANA, you know, had almost complete control of the country at that point.
And the Afghans that you were working with and becoming friends with, what were they, ANA, or were they civilians, or what was the kind of role that they had with you guys?
Yeah, so like I said, we were engineers, so our prime function was to build. So whether that's security or buildings, B huts, jocks, whatever. So we worked with them as contractors, and they essentially supplied us with whatever we needed for our mission. So we worked with them nearly every day. But like I said, it's, these were our friends. Like, I don't even look at them as coworkers. I looked at these guys as like, these are my good buddies, just like, the guy standing right next to me in an American uniform.
So, like, for a lot of people like myself and quite a lot of the listeners, we didn't really have much kind of contact with the local population other than a conversation with somebody where you didn't understand what nobody understood what was saying. A few candies get exchanged, So we never built those relationships with the locals. Some guys worked closer with the Afghan army and had that. But, can you talk a bit more about, it sounds such a stupid question because, as you know, and I know, and most of the people listening know, that humans are humans. But, it's for a lot of soldiers being out there, you always seem to, feel that this army was, the army was just kind of, it was almost like this separate entity in a country that's going about its normal daily life. So, how did you come about building relationships? Was it something you had to work on, or was it something that was you fell naturally into?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy for people that haven't been there to forget that this was not a war against Afghanistan, right? This was a war against Al Qaeda. This was a war against the Taliban. And the people of Afghanistan just were kind of caught in the middle. But there's some of the best people in the entire world. When we were going through this evacuation, my friends Abdul and Muhammad were trying to get out through Abbey Gate. And, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know how much just absolute chaos was going on there. And, the phone lines were real bulky because we had jammers going. The Taliban were cutting wires. So maybe 5% of the calls would get through. So they were very important calls, right? But every time I would answer the phone for my friend Abdul trying to escape the country with his family, the very first thing he would say is, "Hey, brother, how's your family?" And it's just such an Afghan thing, right? Like, these people are the most hospitable people in the world. And he's in one of the worst situations of his entire life. And he's asking me how my family is, to the point where I'm like, "Abdul, shut the hell up and just tell me what's going on, man, because we don't have much time here." But that's them. I mean, it's not hard to create relationships with Afghans. They want to be your friend. These people never asked me for anything. The entire time I was with them, they never asked me for a single thing. Yet they would constantly bring us lamb. They would bring us homemade bread. They would just bring us all these things and just constantly look after us. So, for our government to then turn their backs on these people and leave so many of them behind is just horrible.
So can you talk us through then the situation that kind of arose in 2021 with these guys in particular, and how you kind of came to be involved in all the events that followed the Taliban overtaking the country?
Yeah. So like I said, I met them up in Mazar Sharif, which is in the very north of the country. They ended up, once that base closed, they ended up fleeing back to Kabul as the Taliban kind of started taking over all of Afghanistan. Kabul was kind of the last city to remain a stronghold of the Afghan National Army and the Afghan government. So it was, it was August. I don't remember the date. I'm sitting in my kitchen with my mother, and I get a FaceTime from Abdul, and I answer it, and he's sitting in his living room of his parents' house holding his little baby girl. And at that point, it was, pretty obvious what was about to happen to all of Afghanistan and Kabul. And, I was talking to my mom through the situation prior to the phone call. And I just remember sitting here and my mom is just off screen and she's looking at this little girl, and my mom just starts crying because she knows the future for this little girl that's about to be under Taliban rule. And at this point, I didn't think that there was really anything that I was going to be able to do to help them. But, her future was no school, no education. She wasn't going to be able to leave her house without a male companion. She wasn't going to be able to wear the clothes that she wanted. She wasn't going to be able to have a job. She essentially had no voice and no future. And my mom quickly, picked up on that and just started bawling right next to me. So me and Abdul just kind of started talking about the options of, how we could possibly figure out how to get him out. At this point, I didn't know anything about the SIV program, the special immigrant visas, had never heard that term before. He had done some research and, he said, "Hey, there's this SIV thing. can you help me with this? And by the way, when I started going through those documents as an American English speaker, these documents were very challenging for an Afghan who, maybe speaks English, but probably can't read or write. It's actually impossible. How a lot of these people were able to even navigate these forms is incredible. But, I started going through the list of everything that would be needed. One of the very first things that was going to be needed was a recommendation letter from a superior. So we started going down the path of trying to track down who Abdul Muhammad reported to on base. Quickly found the guy. I won't say his name because I talk very ill of him in my book. Sent him an email. He didn't respond. Sent him a follow-up email the next day because obviously the clock was ticking. He finally responded, and his response was, "I don't think I can help because I'm scared of what this might do for my career." And I don't know that I've ever been so disgusted by another human being in my entire life. My good friend Chris Davis, who wrote the foreword for my book and is a big part of the story, once said in an interview, "If you're not willing to put your rank on the table, you shouldn't wear it." And I don't think there's a truer statement in this situation. To choose safe passage in your career over safe passage for a human being who's being hunted by a brutal enemy is pathetic and cowardly. And that's what this guy chose to do.
It makes no sense either, does it? Because the whole idea of the military and service is sacrifice. And the idea is that you should be willing to perform the higher sacrifice and give in your life. So when you have a leader in that position who's not even willing to risk his career, that man, as you say, has absolutely no right to be in that position, because if he's not willing to risk his career, he's certainly not willing to risk his life for strangers, which is a part of being a soldier, or for his own men. It's almost like, it's you have all these ideas about the military and you have all these ideas about your leaders, and it must have been a real shock to your core to find that out of these people that you'd served with, that was the way that they prioritized, the importance of things. Was that a real gut punch? As well as being disgusting, did it? Because it seems very indicative of the bigger picture too, right?
Yeah.
That there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, it was a gut punch. I thought we were stuck right there, and we saw so much selflessness, I think, through this whole operation, through the whole digital Dunkirk world, of just a lot of people giving everything they had to help these people. So to run into somebody like that, especially when I needed him and my friends needed him, that was frustrating. But luckily enough, the next day we were able to get a recommendation from somebody else in that same chain of command. So we were back on track. But yeah, that was tough.
And was this somebody who presumably he'd met these guys too? You weren't asking him to vouch for somebody he'd never met.
Correct. Absolutely. He knew these people and worked with them. So.
And one thing I wanted to ask you about Abdul, you said you're a young kid. Was Abdul a young man himself? Or?
Yeah, he's he's 32 right now. So, he was 30 during the evacuation, and he started working with American troops probably when he was 20 or 21. So it's been his whole life.
And presumably he had no intention of leaving Afghanistan, so long as it wasn't under Taliban control.
Yeah, that's funny, because I remember when I left Mazar Sharif to head down to Camp Moorhead, I remember going to say bye to them, and we shook hands, and I said, "Hey, you got to come visit me in Michigan, man." And we both laughed at that, knowing that was never going to happen. But it was just kind of something that we could smile at as we said goodbye for what was probably going to be the final time. So yeah, if you're an Afghan, there's not many paths to leave the country.
But I think something that a lot of people miss was, because, I had a tiny bit of involvement in this kind of thing. And then obviously I worked on the book where we interviewed a lot of people. These people didn't want to leave. I'm not saying there wasn't a single person on the plane that saw an opportunity and grabbed it. I'm not saying that.
Sure.
But a lot of these guys, the reason they were willing to put their lives on the line for Afghanistan was because they love their home. The same reason as you put your life on the line for America, or I do it for the UK. It's because we love our homes, and you want the homes to be the best place they can be for your families. And I think that really just gets missed with so many people. It's like it was the choice of death or go. I mean, I've never met this officer of yours, but it's kind of like you're just thinking of like this is like as well as he's got someone as one of his NCOs coming in and asking for help on this, and you don't do that unless it's the most dire of circumstances. What the other question I had, mate, as well is like Mazar-e-Sharif, like you said, it's quite far up in the north of the country. I mean, was there difficulty in them getting there from there to Kabul?
I never asked him about that. But yeah, I know as soon as the that base closed, so that was a NATO base we were on. It was run by the Germans. As soon as that base ended up closing, I think they just drove down to Kabul. I don't think they ran into any Taliban issues or any Taliban checkpoints. But I guess I'm not entirely sure on that. But yeah, just to touch on what you said earlier, I mean, like they left their they left their mom, their dad. They might not ever see their mom or dad again in their lives. They can't go back to Afghanistan, and their parents don't have any path to leave Afghanistan. So they left a ton of family behind. And so that's not an easy decision that these people made.
Not at all. And especially knowing that they might be on the end of reprisals themselves.
Yep, exactly.
As we know, unfortunately, the Taliban aren't somebody who will say, okay, well, you did this, therefore we'll punish you. It's like, all right, well, we can't get hold of you, kill your dad.
Yep. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but the third family that I ended up helping out kind of had a similar situation to that. He's my friend Bismillah Paiman. He's an American soldier that's serving in my old unit, but he's an Afghan, and his family was stuck in Afghanistan during this evacuation, and I was asked to help them out. But the Taliban, knew of this family they had ties to American soldier, and that's a very dangerous situation to be in. So we had to help them get out.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot to say that that's actually more dangerous for them than if he'd have served in the Afghan army. So I just want to, before we go on as well, I just want to say, because I looked over the British kind of equivalent of SIV, which was the Arab program, and dude, exactly the same. I've got for what it's worth, a college education, and I was looking at that paperwork like this is insane. Like I can't understand how anybody came up with that, thinking that this is something that somebody who speaks maybe they're not even maybe they speak English, they might not be able to read and write it, and to give these forms to people was insane. It was literally insane. It's the only way I can put it. I know in the UK we had the program was going on for years, but there was I can't remember the number of cases now, but we're talking a tiny percentage of these cases actually getting processed, and a lot of them going for years. Was the SIV the same thing? Was it, as well as the complexity of the forms themselves, what kind of like a backlog was there on it?
Yeah, the whole SIV program has been a complete disaster. It wasn't really designed for a mass evacuation like this. I met with Senator Blumenthal about a year ago on this situation, because there's, the Afghan Adjustment Act is something that's been stalled in Congress, and, gives paths to Afghans for citizenship, because the big problem right now is, we're 2 years later and we still don't have paths to citizenships for a lot of these people. So a lot of these Afghans are here in the States on parole, on refugee parole, and that only lasts for 2 years. So technically, coming up here next month, Abdul and Mohammed could be deported back to Afghanistan. I don't think that's going to happen. I can't imagine our government is going to send these people back into the hands of the Taliban, but it's not entirely off the table. One thing Senator Blumenthal said to me is that is entirely possible. People get deported from this country every single day. So they really need to figure out, how we're going to help these people and give them a path to citizenship. It's been 2 years, and it's quite pathetic at this point.
I mean, mate, like we managed to organize an invasion of Afghanistan within a month of the towers being hit. Like you'd think that we'd be able to sort out a path to permanent residence within 2 fucking years. It is just, again, it's the words that keep coming up to me whenever I talk to anyone about this stuff: disgusting and insane. The two things I keep thinking about. We'll go in a bit later and we'll talk about the Afghan Adjustment Act a bit more and the kind of situation these guys are in now in the States. But let's kind of talk about the actual act of getting from Kabul, the city, onto Kabul, the airport. And I suppose the first thing about that would be, you went to Bagram. What did you think at the time of the decision to shut down that base?
I think that a private on his first week of being in the military probably could have said that, hey, this is a bad idea. It was very obvious that it didn't make any sense. I mean, I've been to HKaya, I've been to Bagram. To move the evacuation to HKaya that only has one working runway, very slim security posture, it didn't make any sense. So why that decision was made, I can't tell you the reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We will only ever be able to guess at that, but I've not met anyone with any kind of ounce of sense in them who's ever thought that it was, a good idea. Why we would limit something like that. You can kind of understand if it was under siege, if it was Kaysan or something, you'd be like, all right, maybe this isn't a good place. But that's just another, again, I have to use the word.
I mean,
insane.
The other major flaw that happened from that is when we left Bagram, we left essentially in the middle of the night without a proper handoff to the ANA. And we all know what happened then is, all the prisoners from the Parwan detention facility were released. One of them was a member of ISIS-K who ended up being the person that carried the bomb, the suicide vest, into Abbey Gate. So we had this guy in detention. We had him in prison. And due to our hasty exit of Afghanistan without a proper handover, a lot of people lost their lives.
Right. And you could probably have recruited a number of people from that prison who were willing to do it. I mean, you're going to find the most radical of radicals inside a prison where they've just been held, by NATO forces and by Afghan forces. And when Abdul Mohammed, did they come down with Kabul together, or were they two separate parties that you were dealing with?
No, they came together. So they're actually related. They're cousins. So they traveled together. So they got down to Kabul. I guess my story kind of picks back up after we finally, had the SIV filed, we had the recommendation letter, we had everything we needed. I reached out to my local senator here in Michigan, Senator Debbie Stabenow, who I can't say enough good things about her and her team. They had nothing but good intentions to help us. I don't think they had the best resources to help us. Not that was their fault. But, sent them all the information. They said that they would try to expedite things as best they could. But the guidance that they had received from the State Department was to have them shelter at home until they got a call for evacuation. And had we followed that advice, they would be sitting in Kabul right now waiting for that phone call, because they don't even have case numbers yet 2 years later.
Yeah, with 150,000 other Afghans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, quickly realized that was not, our next step. In a quick phone call with Abdul Mohammed, we decided that, we just got to make a run for the airport and see what happens. So they gathered up whatever documentation that they could hold, which is a very dangerous thing to do when you're crossing Taliban checkpoints. And we learned that same day because Mohammed got snatched up by the Taliban. He got beaten very badly by AK-47 rifles and by a metal pipe. He still had big bruises on him when I saw him 2 months later, but he was lucky enough to escape into the just crazy large crowd and got away. So Abdul Mohammed saw a lot of people funneling in towards Abbey Gate. I had never heard of the term Abbey Gate before at this point either. For people that don't know, it was, a sewage canal. So Abdul Mohammed, their 2 wives and their 5 children, anywhere from 6 months to 8 years old, were all standing in knee to waist deep sewage water for 12 hours on the first day.
In what kind of heat? Like Afghan summer heat?
Yeah, I mean, it was people were dying all over the place from heat exhaustion. They didn't have any water. They didn't have any food. Keep in mind, that's a long time to be standing in the heat for a 6-month-old baby. And anybody that's seen the pictures of Abbey Gate knows that it was just an absolute disaster, and people were being squashed and, trampled, and just death everywhere. So that first attempt didn't really work out. They never really got close enough. And something that'll stick with me forever is I got a phone call from Abdul. And like I said, because of the jammers, they would have to retreat back anytime they wanted to call me. So I got a call from Abdul, and after 12 hours, he said, "Brother, can I take this time to go home and hug my children?" And man, that just hit me right in the gut. And I just, I really felt like a failure at that point, because I'm a, non-commissioned officer in the United States military. Here they are standing 10 feet from the US military, and there's nothing that I can do to get them in.
And I just want to say as well, because again, I just want to highlight how insane some of these things were that was going on. Like a lot of these people, like the guys you're talking about here, the same with a lot of people that the Brits got out. They had people on the UK, on the US side, who could vouch for their identities, who had checked their passports, who had checked their papers. But then we had to send them across towns and city controlled by the Taliban. It's like, do they really need to have the hard copy of something on them when we've got the copies of it on our phones? But we've seen it. We know the people. We know the paperwork. Without doubt, there will have been people who died because of this decision that they had to have a hard copy piece of paper on them. This level of bureaucracy that just makes absolutely no sense, whatsoever. And, these are the kind of things where, you're talking about earlier about learning lessons. Maybe a simple lesson is, right, we know who you are. We know your paperwork. We're going to be talking to people on the other end, who can verify you. It's time to ditch. It's time to get rid of those. It's time to get rid of something that can literally get your family killed if you get caught with it.
Yeah, I mean that was a big problem, is traveling across Taliban checkpoints with U.S. identification. It is a very difficult thing to do. And the other, when I was interviewing a lot of the Marines that stood at Abbey Gate for my book, the one common thread that they all said was the criteria from the State Department was always changing. So one day they were accepting something, the next day they weren't, the following day they were accepting it again, and these Marines really struggled with, they sent people away the day prior for something that should have got them in. And, those people might be dead right now. And a lot of them are struggling with that. And the other thing is, like, we weren't flying these planes straight to Washington, D.C., right? With these planes all went to lily pad sites like UAE, where they were getting thoroughly checked, as we knew exactly who were on these planes. Nobody came into the U.S. that wasn't properly inspected. So yeah, I mean, I think the State Department really botched it, the evacuation, and a lot of people died because of it.
I mean, the Brits I spoke to, they said that it got a lot harder to get people out once the Foreign Office were there. Because at first they were going, you know what? He hasn't got what was being told to, but fuck it, this is clearly a British bloke. This is clearly an Afghan that knows Britain. He knows the football teams. He knows us. He's going through. And then once those layers came in from government, then all of a sudden it was, well, now they can't get through. And they actually slowed down the amount of people they were able to get back at that point. And like you said, they're getting vetted anyway at a certain point.
Yep. That's an important piece is, I think that I've never been prouder to share the same uniform as the guys that stood on that wall, the Americans, the Brits. But also I've just never been more disappointed in my government. So it wasn't, the guys that stood on that wall were heroes, and nothing that happened was their fault. It was completely the government's just lack of accountability.
No, I would totally agree with that, mate. I feel the same way. I feel like there's a lot of things that you can point to over that 20 years that could have been done better, or, it was a very weird one, because I almost feel like it comes to the detriment of our militaries at the time that we bail the governments out so often. There was, by rights, there was no reason for there to be any success in this operation. But the guys and girls that were out there pulled off a fucking miracle. And then, and it's almost like, because we're so good, though I say I wasn't out there, but just generally speaking, the militaries, like, I could look at something like the Falklands War, where there's no right that we should have been able to do what we did as the British military, but you pull it off. And then time and again, our troops pull off these like fucking miracles. And then that just kind of, I almost feel, just makes the people in power almost more complacent about what they put them into, because they're like, oh, they'll kind of, they'll kind of figure it out. But obviously, ultimately, people paid for their lives for that courage.
Yeah, I read a passage from your book actually that was talking about how I don't know if it was a government official or someone in the British military reached out and asked you for help evacuating somebody. And that must have just felt so weird because, the same thing happened to me. I had generals reaching out to me asking for help, and it's not how it's supposed to be, right? The government shouldn't be asking a reservist staff sergeant sitting in Michigan for help evacuating people. Like, what the hell is going on? So to know that that was happening on your end too is just, I mean, it's fitting, I guess. The whole thing was just a disaster.
I mean, the first person who got in touch with me was a US EOD guy, because the paras were going out and grabbing people at the time, and I think the US guys had a bit more of like a set of handcuffs put on them. I know as well. I've just been working with a guy right now who was doing the same kind of thing you were, and he was a British guy, but he knew Delta guys from his work in Iraq. So the Delta guys were going out and getting people, and I don't want to, like, people shouldn't quote me on this, but from what I've been told, they were going off reservation. They'd been told not to do it, and they were going, "Fuck this, we're going out and getting people." And again, like, that just makes you think, like, you couldn't be more proud of them.
Yep.
And as well, but it's again, mate, it's a weird one because we always told about this special relationship between the UK and the US, but then we saw it here. To complete strangers, social media. Hey, bro, can you help me with this? Yeah, no problem, I got you. And then this chain bouncing from American to a Brit, maybe an Aussie in there, and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose on that note, then, how did you then go about? You've obviously had your contact with the guys from your own time out there, but how did you go about maneuvering from where they were, onto a plane?
Yeah, so I didn't know anybody at the airport, which would have been nice. But this is, a pretty good segue into the digital Dunkirk world that kind of just happened very naturally. So after that first failed attempts, I took to Instagram hard, and I was just reaching out to anybody that I thought might be able to help. I hit up the team over at Zero Blog 30 podcast. Honestly, not really expecting a response because I figured they were just getting blown up. All three of them responded to me instantly, and kind of gave me direction on some other groups that I could join, some text threads that I could jump into. So I got introduced to kind of the digital Dunkirk world through them. Got thrown into a chat room. Quickly met a gentleman named Chris Davis, who I mentioned earlier, who's a Marine Corps officer who had contacts inside the gate and were evacuating people from Abbey Gate. So made a whole bunch of contacts through that digital Dunkirk network. Immediately turned Abdul and Mohammed around because at this point, it was pretty late in the game and we had to get them out. So sent pictures to Chris Davis of exactly of what my guys and their families were wearing. Had them made a cardboard sign that said Marmal, which was the camp that we met at. So they were holding up the sign. They fought their way to the front of Abbey Gate again. Luckily, actually got scooped up pretty quickly. But then, they went dark for about 2 hours. Got a phone call expecting them to be sitting in the airport safe and sound, and they had been kicked out because they didn't have the proper documentation. And again, this is not the Marines' fault who was standing at the gate. This is just, lack of plan from the State Department. So
sorry to interrupt, mate. Was it the State Department that kicked them out?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know for sure. Abdul and Mohammed don't really know. They just know that they got turned around by a civilian. So quickly messaged Chris Davis again and just kind of venting to him like, man, this is such bullshit. Like, what am I going to do? And honestly, he was just such a rock for me. And he was like, dude, do not stop. Like, you have to keep going for these people. So kind of just made a promise to myself right there that I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to do anything until these people get out. And so we just keep making pushes to the front because, again, every time they want to call me, they got to go all the way back to the end of Abbey Gate because we're just trying to come up with different ways to get them in. So I'm kind of skipping over a lot of important details here, but for the sake of time, finally they get back up to the front. I get another valuable call from Abdul, but this time he doesn't give me that custom Afghan greeting. He doesn't ask me how my family is, and doesn't even have the phone to his ear. And I can hear him shouting, but it's at a distance. So I quickly realized that he has his phone in his hand, but his arm is extended, like he's trying to hand his phone to somebody. So then all of a sudden a voice comes on the phone, and it's an American Marine. And he says, he identifies himself. He says, Sergeant Zelensky, United States Marine Corps. And I just almost dropped to my knees and I identified myself. I said, Sergeant Cook, United States Army, just quickly blurted out the situation because I didn't know how long the call was going to last. Told them who these guys were and that they had SIVs pending and asked him to bring them down to the State Department and walk them through himself. There's a little bit of confusion, obviously, which is, makes sense for the situation. And he thought that I was actually at HKIA. And he said, hey, I got no resources. I need you to come down and grab these guys and bring them through to state. And my heart kind of dropped. And, again, I explained the situation. I'm like, hey, man, I'm stateside. Like, I begged him. Not that I needed to, because I know he would have taken them anyway, but I begged him to walk them down to state, and he agreed. And so again, they went dark and didn't have any comms with them for about 2 hours. And then I get a text, and it's just a picture of all 9 of them sitting in an airport hangar with State Department bracelets on. And I knew that they were in and they were safe at that point. So that was just a crazy experience. I remember I walked upstairs to my bedroom. I threw both my fists in the air by myself, and I just started clapping and crying. And I was just so thrilled that I was able to, assist and be a small part of their evacuation.
Yeah. And I think one of the crazy things about this is there's so many people who, that guy's name, Zelensky. There's so many other people involved that you'll never know the names of. You'll never meet them. We're all kind of vital parts in making this happen. And it's a powerful thing, mate, like to know it.
Yeah, there's so many heroes from those few weeks in August. And some of them are getting a lot of attention, which they absolutely deserve. And some of them are getting no attention. And, part of my book and the reason I wanted to write it is just to identify a couple more heroes that were there. Again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but Zelensky, like when we were on the phone, I immediately wrote his name down, but in the chaos, I thought he said Volensky with a V. So I wrote down Volensky, and I had a 1.5-year manhunt in the Marine Corps looking for a Sergeant Volensky from 2-1 Weapons Company. And no one could find this guy. Finally, I took to Instagram and posted, like, does anyone know Sergeant Volensky? And someone said, do you mean Sergeant Zelensky? And I said, yep, that's probably my guy. And, 10 minutes later, I'm on a phone call with this guy again, but this time it's a little more calm. And we talked for an hour. We cried together, and, I was able to thank him and just give him an update on the family. And then luckily enough, he actually flew up to Michigan from California. And I greeted him and gave him a big hug, and then took him over to Abdul and Mohammed's house for Afghan dinner with all the kids. And man, what a special moment. He was there with his dad. And, I don't think I've ever seen a dad more proud of his son than Zelensky's dad, seeing him, give a hug to Abdul and Mohammed. So it was a special moment. And
obviously, as we all know, 2-1, all the brunt of, the bombing at the gate. And I've spoken to some of the 2-1 guys, but I've just heard great things about them from the paras. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break and hear from Alex at Combat Fuel. Mate, you sent me a box of clusters and I destroyed them in the day. They were so good. Can you tell listeners a bit more about them?
They were so good. So our peanut butter cups have done really, really well. And a lot of feedback we had from customers was we really want another really high, good quality tasting protein snack that doesn't taste like a protein snack. We all know grenade bars. They were brilliant at the time, but the industry has evolved a lot. So what we actually did, we went away and created something completely new. No one had done it before, ever. And I think to date, we've only been copied by one brand. So they are protein clusters with real milk chocolate, but it's so low, you then get 20 grams of protein per pack, and it works out at £2 a pack if you buy a box of them. They are insane. You can eat a lot of them and have no stomach issues. You're not going to shit yourself because you don't use any nasties in them, such as our entire range. So yeah, brilliant, available in white chocolate and milk chocolate, and another one soon.
I do recommend that you get your partner or loved one to hide most of the box, though, because you will just
absolutely
smash through them. Recommend them with a cup of tea. Awesome. All right, let's get back into the podcast. comes back to what you said earlier, mate. Like, we can be, I mean, I'm not American. I'm incredibly proud of those Marines. And not just the Marines there. I mean, I tend to focus on the Marines because they're the ones that I've kind of spoken to more, but obviously there was all kinds of units from all kinds of people there, and, they all deserve, anyone that was there deserves, recognition. I mean, even the people from the State Department, I'm sure they were doing their best, the guys out on the ground, but it's like you said, mate, it's this incredible thing where I've never been more proud of a certain group of people, and I've never been, like, just to the point of pure hatred. Like, so, like in the UK, the government was on its holidays. The Parliament. I say the government, the Parliament. Our kind of equivalent of Congress, if you will, were on their holidays. And I'm like, look, politicians deserve a vacation too, and it's probably a good thing that they get some time off. But when the country that you've just invested 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears into is falling to the Taliban, it's time to cut your fucking holiday short and get your ass in the fucking office. And they didn't come back in until Kabul had already fucking fallen. What is more important than that? And there's no apology for it. And again, I know this for a fact. I know that there was a lot of, let's be honest, there wasn't a fucking lot of them calling for this, but there was some politicians calling for, we need to get back in the fucking office and we need to get on top of this. And that to me is just unforgivable, an unforgivable failure of leadership. How did you feel about, I guess there's two kind of overlapping parts of this. Is one, there's the military leadership, and then there's the political leadership. So what was your kind of thoughts about it then? And then we'll kind of talk about the situation that's going on now.
I don't know that disappointed is strong enough. There's just no accountability. And the troops that were at HKIA deserve it. The Gold Star families, many of whom I just met in Washington, D.C. last week, deserve it. They deserve someone to just step up and say, hey, we fucked up. And I don't think it's going to happen, which is sad. But no one wants to raise their hand and say that we messed up, especially in a upcoming election. And it's sad.
And obviously, we're recording this just so people know this. We're releasing this to coincide with the pre-release of the book. But you're talking about, is it like an investigation committee, or what was it that was happening in DC? Can you talk people through the purpose of it and what actually has been coming of it?
Yeah, there was. So they had a congressional hearing where the Gold Star families were able to go, and they were each able to speak to Congress and give testimony. And then after that, there was this organization that I strongly support is called OAR, Operation Allies Refuge. It's for all the troops that served at HKIA and for the fallen, for the Gold Star families. And so we had a remembrance dinner for the fallen there with the families. And it was, a very special night. But you could just sense that, these families, they want answers. They want accountability. They want someone to just stand up and admit that we messed up, and nobody's doing it.
And I recommend anyone goes and looks at just, like you and I could talk about that all day, but it won't do justice to just watching a few minutes of some of that testimony. I mean, you will be crying, you will be fucking furious all at once. It was incredibly, incredibly powerful. Where do we go from here? Because I dare say that there was military lessons learned, but there's the guys really kind of played the cards that they had, right? It doesn't matter how much, like, you can't really, guys do public order training and that kind of thing, right? But it doesn't matter how much training you get given if you get thrown into a situation that is complete chaos. There's no training you can get for that situation, fully, because how do you train someone to make a decision that's going to possibly lead in the death of the family based on paperwork? That's not something that soldiers can be trained for. That is just something that obviously wasn't beyond people because they rose to the occasion, but it's not something you can train in the way of marksmanship or other kind of skills that we have in the military. And I think it does speak to how kind of flexible, and robust, the troops are. And I think a lot of that comes down to having people of good character in the military, having people who place service to others. These guys were not sleeping for days, and I say guys inclusively as well, because obviously, we had all kinds of units out there. But not sleeping for days, which obviously requires a high standard of fitness. But all these things are things that are kind of covered in the military. But more broadly speaking, how can we make sure that we avoid this? Because the same similar situation happened in Vietnam. There was something within living memory to learn from, and we didn't. And the people in the calling the shots, a lot of them were in the military. Not, we're not talking a really long time after Vietnam. A lot of the people in the higher reaches in the military. So what can be done to change that military leadership? What would you like to see changed? What would you like to see changed in it? If something like this were to happen again, how would you like things to be handled differently?
I think the first thing, as a veteran now, and a civilian, it's my job, and I think all of our jobs, to keep talking about this, which you're doing through your podcast and through your book, and I'm trying to do the same thing. But we need to make sure that this doesn't stop getting talked about, because these stories need to get out. We need to figure out how to get some accountability. And I think there are some congressmen and some senators that are really pushing for accountability. And again, I don't know that it's going to happen, but I hope it does. And I hope that we can learn from these experiences, because, I think the tough thing is, like, what message did this just send to any of our future allies, right? The message that we just sent is, hey, support us for 20 years. We're going to promise you the world. And then we're just going to dip out and not give you any of it, right? And that's a very dangerous message to send. But then, when we think about the future of Afghanistan now, like, it's a tough situation. It's like, where do we go from here? And I don't know that anybody will fully agree on what to do in Afghanistan right now. It's very controversial, and it's just a difficult place to unite. But there is a group that's fighting there right now, and that's the NRF, the National Resistance Front. And as far as I know, they're the only ones that are fighting the Taliban. And to date, there hasn't been any interaction with the U.S. government and the NRF. And I think that there needs to be some conversations. I flew out to Austria to meet with Commander Massoud, who's the leader of the NRF currently. And he says that they could take back Bagram in a day. He says they could take back Kabul, but they don't have the necessary resources to do so. And all they need is money and weapons and ammunition. They're not asking for any boots on the ground or any assistance from the United States or Britain. They just need finances. So I think conversation needs to start happening between our government and the NRF to, see if there's a path there for a partnership against the Taliban and against Al Qaeda.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like either of our governments is opposed to arming people. I mean, we constantly do it. I mean, for fuck's sake, if we armed former Al Qaeda groups in Syria and Libya, then we can do the same with people who are fighting the Taliban. I mean, what I wonder on the accountability as well is, like, these guys who you've been talking to, these Marines, people like Zelensky. What has this done to the kind of the morale of these guys? Are they, because a lot of the guys I spoke to, signed off after this, and then it kind of went two ways. The guys had either gone, just is exactly what I joined up for, and this has made me want to do 22 years in the military or whatever. And then other guys have gone, this is fucking bullshit, I'm out. What kind of reactions have you seen from people?
Yeah, kind of the same. I think moral injury is a big term that's getting thrown around in the U.S. right now. And, it just talks about, how devastated the troops are that were there. And, when you see little babies being thrown over a 12-foot barricade and they're getting stuck in concertina wire, that's going to affect you. When you see kids getting stomped to death at Abbey Gate by grown men and you can't reach them, that's going to affect you. Zelensky got handed a dead child. His wife actually had a child while he was on deployment, and he had to hold this dead baby in his arms before he could even hold his own child. That's going to affect you. So yeah, a lot of these guys that I talk to are hurting pretty bad, and some are getting help for it and some aren't. But yeah, it kind of stirs up that question of, like, what was it all for? What was the 20 years of blood, and why did my buddy die there? And why did I, dedicate so much of my life to that deployment in Afghanistan if we just handed it over? And I know this answer has been said by many people, but I fully agree with it. So I'm going to say it again, is it, when I look at it, it absolutely was worth it because, for 20 years, Abdul and Mohammed's wife, they got to go to school. They got to have jobs. Their kids got to go to school. Their wives could leave the house whenever they wanted to. They didn't have to cover up their faces. They didn't need a male escort. They had freedom. Actually, one thing that really sticks with me is at the OAR event last week, Sean Ryan from the Sean Ryan Show was one of the keynote speakers. And he said, once you taste that freedom, you want it, right? So I pray for the Afghan people every day. I hope that somebody, something happens where they can overtake the Taliban and get their freedoms back. I know that they want it. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do that.
Yeah, and Afghanistan is such a young population. And a lot of people, especially in the more kind of populated areas, have tasted that. I don't think life didn't change in a lot of the rural areas, except for being a front line for 20 years. But a lot of people in the towns, they did get to experience that, and I don't think that should be underestimated. The moral injury one is a very interesting one because you've got the guy. I think you've got to separate the Afghanistan into kind of almost two parts. It's the guys that went there and did your traditional deployments, and then there's the HKIA guys, right? And like you talk through the kind of moral injuries that a lot of HKIA guys will experience. And then there's the moral injury for the guys on the traditional deployments where it's like, why did my buddy get blown up by an ID? Why did I shoot a farmer by accident? What was all this about? But I almost feel as well, I can totally understand that. I almost feel like then being able to be a part of getting somebody out and seeing a tangible result of, okay, I got because a lot of people you do, I know the army, I think you guys do year-long deployments, right? You go around, you patrol around, you get blown up, you get shot at, you give some sweets to a local kid, and then you go home. And you're like, what the fuck was that all about? But during the kind of digital Dunkirk, you actually got to say, okay, did something positive there. Like I've said this before. I think I did more good with a few phone calls than I did in 6 months of fucking patrolling. And I actually think in a way that a lot of people have, like people kind of in that position might have therefore had closure on what was moral injuries. So I think it kind of goes both ways. And I think as well, there's the other thing I think a lot of people go through after leaving the military is like you were talking about it when you stopped playing hockey. A lot of guys felt when you left the uniform, you took the uniform off, you came out, that's it, team over. And then in that year, we saw, you know what? No, there is still this team, and it's a lot bigger than we thought it was. It wasn't even the guys that we were out there with. It was a guy from Michigan, a guy from Wrexham, like all kind of connected. And I think that, and I don't think anything like that has ever happened in military history. And hopefully it will never happen again. Hopefully there'll never be any fucking need for it to happen again. But I think that maybe if we're looking for a positive to come out of this, which is never going to outweigh the negatives, but if we're looking for a positive, it might just be to remind people that you don't have to be wearing the uniform to be a part of that team. There's other ways of finding purpose. And look, unfortunately, there are plenty of people in the world that need help every fucking day. It could be down the road, could be just down the street from you, could be on the other side of the world. What I wanted to ask as well, though, mate, is, because it's one thing getting people out, but then what happens next to them? So what was it like for Abdul and Mohammed when they, actually, can you tell us a little bit about, because I've heard some horror stories about these kind of, like you call them, like the lily pads. Like I heard some horror stories about that. So what was their kind of experience like after from Kabul to the US and then those first few months?
Yeah, honestly, ours was great. So they went to the UAE. They were there for a day. A lot of people got stuck there for a much longer time. They got shipped to Germany. They were there for 10 days. I actually tried to get on a SpaceA flight to go bring them a bunch of, clothes and stuff. Because, one thing you forget is these people left with nothing. They left with the clothes on their back. They left every possession they had behind. And they were standing in shit water up to their waist for 12 hours before they got on a plane. So I tried to get to Germany, but luckily they were there for, just a few days again. And then they got shipped to DC and then to Indiana. So honestly, like I don't have much to complain about there. I know a lot of people had it much worse, but I did have people like my Senator Stabenow was pushing them through. So they had it pretty good.
And what is their situation when they came over? Were they put into hotels or what was the kind of living situation?
Yeah, so there was an amazing organization called Jewish Family Services that I connected with that sponsored them. And man, I can't say enough good things about this organization, especially for, a Jewish organization to be helping Afghans says a lot about them. Yeah, they put them in a hotel for a month, paid for the hotel, brought them food every day, got them cell phones, paid for their cell phone bill, got them computers, helped them with English classes. I mean, everything you could ask for, helped them start doing their immigration documents, which was something that would have been completely foreign to me. And then even paid for a year of their rent afterwards. So an amazing organization. And like you said, for the people who you don't have to serve to still be in the fight. I mean, this was a way where us out of uniform could stay in the fight. And that fight continues today. I mean, there's plenty of organizations right now that are still trying to evacuate Afghans that need volunteers. So if anyone's, listening that wants to get in this fight, there's still plenty of opportunities to do that.
Yeah, and you mentioned the OAR Foundation as well. I've been following those guys for a while, doing a lot of good work. I'll put the link down to them in the show notes so everyone could just kind of click them and get the correct links and stuff. But let's talk about the book, mate. Like, when did you kind of get the kind of the drive to do that, and what were some of the things that you learned through that process that you may, even having been involved, that you maybe weren't aware of?
Yeah, man, so much. Yeah, I mean, I certainly wasn't planning on writing a book, but it started kind of getting out to my friends and family and to my chain of command of what had happened. So just constantly being asked to tell the whole story and, to tell the whole, I mean, we only got to half of it. I didn't even get into the third family that I evacuated with Senator Blumenthal, but.
Mate, thing is, I always say when we have someone on with a book, this isn't the free audio book. You got,
yeah,
it's the
right.
taster.
So people kept asking me to tell them the story, and it's, in reality, it's like a 3-hour story to tell. So I certainly couldn't say it every single time. And then as time went on, the dates and everything, the order of events started getting fuzzy. And I'm just like, man, I got to just get this on paper so I don't forget what happened. So I kind of just like threw up onto the page, I like to say. And before I knew it, I had 25,000 words. And I'm just like, I think this is a story that needs to be told. Like I said, there's a lot of Marines that I get to talk about in my book whose name has probably never been spoken in any sort of public sense. So I'm just really happy that I get to bring their names to light, because there's just so many heroes from those weeks in August that their story needs to be told.
Yeah, I totally agree, mate. It's like I've always been of the thing of like in military history in 20, 30, 40 years time, usually there's a historical record will come out of it and it'll be general this and general that. It's like, well, what about the guy that was holding the riot shield? What about the guy that was holding the baby? I want to know about those people. Because that's the majority of people that take part in these things. Those are the people on the sticky end who have to live with it for the rest of their lives.
It was the sergeants. It was the enlisted guys that when that bomb exploded, they didn't hesitate. They ran straight into it, right? They ran straight to the bomb site. They ran straight into the fire. Those are the stories that need to come out and that deserve to be told. And another big part of my book is, I do a pretty deep dive of what the DOD report says happened and what that Lance Corporal on the ground says what happened, because there's a drastic difference. And every single Marine that I've talked to says that after that explosion, they were receiving small arms fire, that it was a complex attack. The DOD report strictly claims that they never received any small arms fire and that it was a single bomber. So, when you hear, dozens of Marines tell you I was being shot at as soon as that bomb exploded, I think something's fishy there.
And didn't they not interview the Lance Corporal you're talking about? He wasn't even interviewed for that DOD report, right?
Sergeant Zelensky is that?
No, sorry. The I think it was the guy. I forget his name. I apologize. He was on the Sean Ryan show.
Sergeant Vargas.
Right. because I seem to recall that there wasn't there was somebody who would be the first person that you go and interview
Right.
for this, and was never kind of interviewed about this report. You know, I mean,
Yeah, I don't know that he was interviewed for the DoD report. I know that he's been interviewed since by some congressmen that are really trying to help. Sergeant Vargas. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him as well at the OAR event. But yeah, he specifically claims that they were taking incoming fire. You know, the other major thing that we didn't talk about here is that Sergeant Vargas supposedly had this bomber in his sniper rifle scope. And he got verification from multiple sources that this was the bomber. He asked for permission to engage, and that permission was denied.
I mean, the fact that he should have to ask for permission, you know, in the first place is like, it just goes to show. It's like, on one side, you're asking these kids, because and I say kids with the utmost respect, but we're talking about 18, 19-year-olds, you know, like, you know, you're asking them to make life or death decisions for a family, but then you're not going to you're not going to allow a sniper to make a decision based on, I mean, why are you having threat briefings and getting intelligence and everything like that, if not to allow people in those positions to make their own, you know, decisions? It's absolutely crazy. And unfortunately, that young man has to live with that for the rest of his life, which he should never have had to.
I mean, that young man lost an arm and a leg, and, you know, he could have eliminated the threat, and he tried to eliminate the threat.
You know, and look, it's clearly not a case of somebody being trigger happy, because he had thousands of people in front of him every day. If, you know, but this was the one time, and it's like, you've got to trust that person's, you know, judgment. And, you know, then on the other hand, we've got the drone strike of the family a few days later, because the guy happened to be driving a white Corolla in Kabul. And it's like, so you wouldn't give this sniper with Marines' lives actually on the line, you wouldn't give him permission. But a car that was, I think it was 3 miles outside of the airport with a crowd between it and you know, miles away from the nearest troops, you're not going to, in that scenario, it's Hellfire missile, away you go. And then again, no accountability. You kind of just left shaking your head about this stuff. And the same with the report about that incident. Just complete hand-wringing, complete lack of accountability.
And for John Kirby to stand up on his podium, and, you know, I think we've all heard the words by now, but for him to say that he didn't see any chaos happening at HKIA when, you know, the entire American public was seeing videos come out of there every single day is just cowardly. And the fact that he hasn't retracted that statement, to my knowledge, is somewhat pathetic.
Yeah, and just a real slap in the face to everybody. You know, to come out and say something that everybody knows is objectively true. You know, it's, and again, people talk all the time about, why have we got retention? Why have we got a recruiting and retention problem in these Western militaries? It's like, have you not been have you not been paying attention to what's been happening for years? So
I don't blame people for, you know, with the news cycle, it happens so quick. Most Americans don't have any idea of what happened at HKIA. I don't blame them. I imagine it's the same way in your country. Even my close friends don't know what happened there. So I think that's another big motivation for me telling the story through this book is just to, you know, get the story out there for more people to read.
Well, mate, like I thank you for doing it. And, you know, if there's anything else we can do to support them, then please let me know. And, you know, if with, you know, Abdul and Mohammed now, let's kind of just finish up on those guys. Now that they're in America, you know, how have they settled in, and what are they looking forward to now in the future?
They have, like I said, they have their own apartments. They have jobs. The kids are in school. The kids are in soccer. The kids are learning English so fast. It's scary. They're doing very well. And they have a really great support network here. They live just 30 minutes down the road from me. They wanted to move to Michigan to be close to me, which has just been such a blessing. And I get to go over there for Sunday Afghan dinners, which are just the best. Everything is great except for just the uncertainty for their future. for their immigration status here in the U.S. So I hope that can get resolved somewhat quickly through the Afghan Adjustment Act or anything. Just Congress needs to act and find a pathway to citizenship for these people that stood shoulder to shoulder with us for 20 years.
Michael, thanks so much for coming on today, brother. Really appreciate it. Good luck with everything that's going on. Keep up the good work, mate. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this platform.
You're welcome, brother. Guys, thank you so much for listening today. Big thanks again to Michael for coming on the podcast, and special shout out to Combat Fuel and the Patreons for making today's episode possible. Remember, guys, we will be back. There may be a little break of a few weeks before we start rolling out the new episodes. Once I figure out what the plan is going forward in terms of, are we going to have a separate war podcast and are we going to have a separate kind of like veteran issues kind of podcast, then I'll let you know. I might just come in and record like a short 5-minute kind of update and stick that up on the feed. So you can kind of get your information there, and I'll also be putting up on Instagram. VSOM Podcast is at VSOM Podcast is one Instagram account. At Veteran State of Mind is another. Changes are coming, guys, but what will continue is bringing you fantastic guests with a lot of insights, with a lot of experience. Obviously, we're wrapping up. This will probably be the last episode of the year. And I want to say very, 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 very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. It gives me purpose, gives me a reason to get out of bed, or rather to get out away from the desk and to come down here. And I just want to say thank you for all the interactions, all the messages, you people listening, those of you supporting the Patreon. It means a lot. So thank you very much, guys. And we'll catch you next time. And I love you. Bye.